Welcome to the First Time Facilitator podcast. Whether you're a first-time facilitator or a seasoned pro, listen in for tips and tricks to make a bigger impact at the next workshop you deliver. And now, your host. She lost her voice at the World Heavyweight Fight at Madison Square Garden, Leanne Hughes.
Hi everyone and welcome to the show. I'm your host Leanne Hughes and I'm here to help you create unpredictable workshop experiences that predictably work. I'm scheduling another interview on today's show. I know it has been a while between solo episodes, but to be honest, I've just had some amazing conversations with people recently and I've got a stack of more interviews coming up. So I thought I would share this one even though it's out of order. Now, if you do miss my solo episodes, you can catch me sharing tips every day of the week, Monday to Friday on my LinkedIn profile. So we can connect up there. Or I'm pretty present and available on the Facebook group called The Flip Chart. I'm in Brisbane at the moment for a few weeks and then heading off to India to deliver some leadership training, back in Brisbane for a day and then off to Singapore for 3 days. And to be honest, the jet lag it hit me pretty hard after the Europe trip and I caught a virus as well. So it's been tough getting back, and particularly as a solopreneur. It's not like the work stops when you're sick. And I know this happens in the employment world as well. You come back to a ton of emails and things that you need to do. But I've had to take advice from many of my previous guests about self-care and take that time to just rest, which is hard because I like doing things and there's so much that I want to do. Luckily though, I've got my voice back to hop on a call with this week's guest because I loved chatting with her. I feel like we're facilitation twins, even though we have completely different career backgrounds. Her name is Dr Myriam Hadnes, and she's based in Amsterdam. And she also hosts a podcast about workshops. Now, on this show, we talk through her career pivots and how she discovered that she didn't fit into the corporate HR box, which led her into starting her own business. We also talk about business pivots, which I'm finding is something I'm doing a lot of as well, trying to figure out what I specialize in and recognizing that what I do decide to focus on needs to be based on meeting a need or solving a problem. It's not about delivering what I want to deliver. It has to solve a problem that's out there in the world. Myriam's background and PhD is in behavioural economics, and that has helped her to understand what it is that gets in our way. She has developed a toolbox to remove these obstacles through micro interventions. The time she has spent both living and working in Europe, Asia and Africa has taught her that most of the challenges we face are self-made and independent of our cultural, social and disciplinary backgrounds. When she listens to her clients and their teams, she sees the human side and their commonalities. She also hosts the podcast Workshops Work, designs and facilitates workshops and hosts live mastermind events for expert facilitators. It was wonderful connecting with Myriam and hearing her passion for workshops and facilitations in this episode. Remember, if you want to continue the conversation when the podcast is over, you can join our community of over 310 facilitators from all over the world on our free Facebook group called The Flip Chart. On there, we also have details for a facilitator meetup in Brisbane on the 2nd of November. So if you'd like to know more, join us in the group. Or if you don't use Facebook, good on you for taking that step. You can shoot me an email, hello@leannehughes.com. You can view a link to the group, Myriam's contact info and other resources mentioned in this episode in the show notes for this one over at firsttimefacilitator.com/episode 89. Now, onto the show. I would like to welcome to the First Time Facilitator podcast, joining us from Luxembourg at a pretty shabby Airbnb. Welcome, Myriam Hadnes, to the show.
Hello, so good to be here. Thank you, Leanne.
Thank you for booking in. We've been talking about this moment for quite some time. We were introduced a few months ago and I've been following your work on Instagram and LinkedIn. I think we're both driven by the same thing, and you've got a podcast. Actually, we might just start. I'm getting really excited and want to jump straight into your podcast, but let's talk a bit about your career history and what brought you into the world of facilitation.
Yeah, this was actually unplanned. And I think for you it was similar. We have lots in common actually. So I'm very excited to be here and to chat a little bit. I actually had a career in higher education and I only left university maybe 2 years ago or so, or 2.5 years ago. And I was looking for a job in the private sector, in the shiny private sector, wanted to work in organizational development. I was really driven by helping employees to find meaning in their work and to contribute, because I left a quite toxic environment. But I was lucky enough to witness the beauty and power of co-creation. So what happens to an organizational culture once you give employees a voice and you make them feel heard? So this was my first experience with actually workshops and all that. So I was looking for a job, and after a while, I realized that I'm actually maybe unemployable because I don't really fit into an HR box with my background in higher education, behavioral economics. And so I found luckily a few mentors who would help me to find my way and introduce me to other people. And I stalked people who had an interesting profile on LinkedIn and would just contact them and ask them for information interviews to learn about their role. And eventually I just realized, okay, I will go solo, I'll go all in, and I find my way somehow.
That is like some massive pivots in 2.5 years from higher education. I have heard, I've got some friends that work in higher education. I'm sure it's not the case everywhere, but they've also mentioned a bit of a toxic kind of hierarchy, and it's very political. Not that that doesn't happen in corporate as well, but
I think it's differently political and differently hierarchical. And I think for me, what I've observed, one of the key things is that most of the people who are there never signed up to be managers or to be involved in people issues. They are mostly driven by academics. They want to research. They come into all these administrative tasks and people issues, and they're supposed to take care of their colleagues and students. So this makes it quite complicated.
Yeah, that's right.
On the other hand, it's a very inspiring environment because, I mean, it's great to work with highly intelligent people. So that's the other side.
Yeah, there's absolutely pros and or cons or challenges with, I think, with any company, organization, and it all relates to people at the end of the day. It's funny because I worked in different industries, was in France working for a retail company, and the challenges there were very similar to an Australian mining company. And you think these are completely different brands, and the demographic is very different. Retail, mainly female. In Australia,
what was your experience in terms of hierarchy? Because the French, as I know them, are quite hierarchical and not so much into co-creation and let's give everyone a voice.
Yeah, actually, I hopped on a Facebook Live in the flip chart yesterday to talk about the differences that I've observed. I also found really asking very direct questions that would, I don't know if I'd necessarily get that in an Australian context. Maybe there's a little more, I don't know if it's respect or people sort of try to figure things out, but that pointed questions and putting the person up the front, I thought that was fantastic because it showed that how well they were absorbing the content. And it was a type of workshop. It wasn't really so much a facilitation, co-creation. It was more of a training session. And that's the thing with this podcast. It's called First Time Facilitator. But broadly, it covers the both of them, like the co-creation as well as the corporate training and ways to make that more engaging.
A facilitator for me is such a broad term, is someone who makes a process easy.
Yeah.
So a process of collaboration of a group, whether it's a learning process, a co-creation process. So a trainer, an educator, a manager can be as much of a facilitator as a pure, let's say, pure workshop facilitator.
I agree. And that's why I think it's such a key skill for anyone in organizations. If you lead meetings, even if you're not a manager, you're a team member, you're trying to drive change, with 2 or 3 people in the room, you're facilitating a process or a conversation. Is that how you see it as well? It's just an essential skill.
Absolutely. And I really believe that in a few years from now, the key management skill will be facilitation. Because to hire all these middle management people who are there to control their team members, I mean, I don't think there's a real need for that. Rather, I think the future lies rather in empowering your team. So you become a facilitator or facilitating leader or however you want to call these people.
Yeah. There's a lady in Australia, Lynn Kazali. I don't know if you've heard of her, but I think her book, I can't remember the exact title, but I think it's something along the lines of Leader as Facilitator. or the facilitative leader. It's something, a combination of those. And
I will check that out.
Yes, I think you'll definitely enjoy that. You'll definitely vibe along with that content. I just can't believe your move. So you left higher education, went to corporate, very quickly discovered, and I think we're both HR corporate dropouts. We should start a club.
I actually never worked in a corporate world.
Oh, you didn't?
Well, I tried it a little bit, and I think I don't fit into a box. Whenever I had an interview with the HR, they didn't know where to put me.
I mean, congratulations. Shows that level of uniqueness, I think, and just probably a bit more visionary in what you want to achieve. And I've hopped on your website, and I will put your website in the show notes. I pointed this out to you in an email. I was so impressed. I think the word I don't know if I used it in the email, but the video on your website, it was almost elegant. It was like, like the room that it was in. Do you want to talk through the style and quickly just talk through that video and what you were trying to achieve and how that conveys the way that you deliver your workshops?
Okay. Are you ready for a few more pivots? When I initially started my business, I called it iDays because I wanted to create idea days. And I thought that all these half-day workshops, all these half-day gatherings, actually, they never leave enough space to really reflect on what has been done. So I thought, okay, I only do full days. I was very extreme. Idea days, full days, only, nothing else. And then I went into the prototyping phase and I created this entire flow where I would give participants the chance to reflect together, because I really start from the belief that the group and the people in the room, they have all the answers already. They don't need me to teach them anything. They don't need the internet to learn or to look up more. They just need someone who helps them access their knowledge, helps them to exchange it, find the right words, find an equal understanding. Maybe that's the most difficult part. And then to cluster, prioritize, and take action. So I started with the idea of having mastermind sessions, actually, where I would bring people with different perspectives together, where they help each other reflect on their own challenges. So this video was actually taken from a prototype that I did of a full day session mastermind where everyone came with their own challenge and reflected with each other. And it was beautiful to see the outcome. But then it was almost 2 years ago. The concept of mastermind was totally unknown in Europe. So every time I had to explain what a mastermind is. So I thought, okay, it's too early. After a few further prototypes, I pivoted again. They were like, okay, mastermind won't happen. And then people started to ask me for ideas about workshop designs. They started to offer me jobs to facilitate workshops. They started to offer me money to design workshops that I didn't even facilitate myself. And they were like, there seems to be a pattern here. So maybe I should focus on workshop design and facilitation. And it's only now recently that I actually came back to the initial idea of masterminds, where I realized with the audience from the podcast that they're mostly facilitators themselves. And they're really seeking this expert exchange, and they have so many questions and feel so relieved to hear that we all have the same problems. We all face the same challenges. And it feels so good not to be alone.
Yes. So Workshops Work is your podcast. Yes. I was searching for a podcast like the ones that we have. Was it 3 years ago when I was off to run a big sort of event in Canada? I was really nervous. I was going through the podcast searching for facilitation and nothing was out there. It was all public speaking. And I'm like, no, completely different skill set. So I also agree that facilitators globally have needed something where we get guests on every week that understand what we're going through in terms of preparing and how we design a great process and just the self-care of it and inspiration as well. So I think that's really important. Quickly on your video, do you know what's really funny? I didn't know that was an actual prototype day. I thought they were actors because it looked so perfect.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I would tell that.
Yeah, I thought they were actors. Like everyone's like good looking and you had the diversity mix, all of it. Oh, wow. They were real people.
And it was all this diversity that was a pure coincidence.
Yes.
Because it was a mix of mentors and friends. So people that I've collected in in the Netherlands in the little time that I've been there. And they were all fantastic human beings. So not actors.
Well, I think it's great, and also shows that it's good that you're seeking out mentors that have the diversity. Not that diversity is the way that you look, but that you've got a range of people in your circle.
Yeah, definitely. And I think even generation-wise, I think it's so important also to learn from people who are younger than us as well as those who are older than us, because all these different perspectives, they just add to the picture. Yeah, it's an interesting process.
It is. So you didn't mention to the audience, but your sort of focus in a university was behavioural economics.
Yes.
So can you share with the listeners what that actually means, what it entails, and then possibly dovetail into, with that theory, how do you use that in designing your workshops? Two very big questions.
Yeah. So behavioural economics is actually a side stream of economics, which is the intersection with social psychology. So basically it studies or tries to make sense of human decision making and to help us to actually get out of our own way to make better decisions. So I did a PhD, and actually it was a totally different field. I was studying the impact of superstitious beliefs and witchcraft on economic decision making.
What? You love your pivots. You're Miss Pivot. I want to read that. Did you actually? I mean, I'd love to read that paper. That's fascinating.
I worked in Burkina Faso a lot, where we researched, the impact of culture and decision making. A lot about religious beliefs, and then solidarity, forced solidarity. But that's a different topic. So I think most have heard of the concept of nudges, which are basically small interventions that help us to take better decisions, and in the best case without us even noticing. And I use this concept for my workshops. So I try to make the process easy for the participants and then understand what is actually in their way. Why do they need me in the first place? So why do they hire me? What is it that prevents them to take the decisions that they need to, or to agree on a certain outcome? And then I try to design the exercise or the flow of exercise in a way that make them step slowly out of their own way. So for instance, when I see that there are a lot of naysayers or naggers or complainers, then I would always have a pre-mortem exercise where we do a brainstorm on, okay, how can we make this fail? How can we make sure that we get to the worst outcome that we can ever imagine? Because then the people will incentivize to paint this black picture. And so they're totally in their element, and they have permission to just complain and to see this negative world. And then they start actually laughing about it. And then in the next step, we say, okay, that's cool. So let's focus on the most important ones. And what can we do to actually prevent that? So our brains are much more creative when we think of problems, because we are risk-averse creatures. We want to survive. So our brains are more creative when we think of problems instead of solutions. And this helps these naysayers to be in their element. And then once we turn it around, again, our brain gets more creative because, oh my goodness, there's this problem. I need to find a solution. So I use these kind of little tricks of how our brain is wired to help people to find better solutions.
That's really smart. So people can come to you, clients can come to you from all around the world and say, hey, Myriam, I'm working with a client, or I am the business. We want to host like a strategy day. These are the things we want to drive. Give you a bit of a profile who's in the room, and then you can design something to meet that objective. Is that some of the work that you do?
Yeah, that's what I would do. I like to have interviews or conversations with the participants beforehand, kind of offline or off the record conversations. Yeah. Because once we're all aligned and we know what the problems, what the hidden agendas are, what the dynamics are, and when we can align the expectations of everyone, it makes it much easier. But yeah, that's basically what I do. I love to design workshop agendas, and I actually, what I like, I do it in a way as I cook. So I love to read cookbooks, but I never cook a recipe exactly how it's written. but I always think, oh, that's a nice inspiration. Then how can I make it my own? So for instance, I love vegan cookbooks. I just love them because they use so many ingredients that I would never use myself, just because they have to, because otherwise it just tastes boring.
Yeah.
So I would take a vegan cookbook and then think, what if I would add some cheese? Or what if I add some cream? Or some fish? And then it becomes my own recipe, my own version of it. And the same is true for a workshop exercise. So I love to read all these kind of resources. I love liberating structures. And I think, okay, so how can I adjust this to my own type of facilitation, but also to the group's needs?
I love that. My husband always says the recipe is just a guide, but I sort of love following it bit by bit and really sticking to the plan. So it's quite funny. I'm like, no, you can't do that. And he just throws things in and it tastes amazing. Good idea about the vegan cookbook, just on an aside. I think that's a good takeaway. But the reason I ask that is often on the flip chart, the Facebook group connected to this podcast, a lot of facilitators post up questions about design and I'm doing this, I want to get this objective. And so there's definitely a need for it. So I just wanted to sort of share that that's something that you offer as a service, because I think you'd be quite popular with some of the listeners.
Thank you. I wasn't aware of that.
Even myself sometimes, it's like, I just love getting new ideas and yeah.
I only realized how valuable this is with a recent client. And they hired me basically to be their sparring partner. And that was just amazing. So I helped them to draft or to bring together all the initial ideas in the room of how the agenda could look like. And it was actually a conference that they wanted to have in a workshop style. And they had all the ideas and they were all kind of internal corporate facilitators in the room. So they had too many ideas. And then it was my role to streamline it and to bring it into a structure that makes sense. But then afterwards, we had these sparring calls where my counterpart would explain or guide me through what they have discussed in the team and what kind of exercise they came up to. And they were like, what if this or what if that? Have you considered that if there are 200 people who have never spoken to each other, enter the room, maybe they need a little bit of guidance. Maybe they need a slow start with first a discussion maybe only with 2 peers and then 5 peers and then a big fishbowl, but don't start with a fishbowl.
Yes.
So these kind of things. And that was fun.
Yeah, I can imagine that being fun and not being the implementer, just going, here are my best ideas. This is going to work. There's your recipe. Off you go.
I guess for you, it's the same, that with the podcast, we learn so much from our guests. And I mean, your guests are fantastic and there's so much value. So at one point you become an expert of all this variety. And then this kind of consulting, advisory or sparring also leverages all this knowledge we accumulated through our guests.
And I love it the most when I have guests on the show that actually have conflicting views on things. Because then you ask the question, oh yeah, why do you think that? And both are equally valid depending on the context, the audience, the team environment, like all these sorts of things. People have their own approaches. One thing that seems to be polarizing, people either love them or hate them, are icebreakers. What are your thoughts on icebreakers?
I had Daniel Stillman on my show, and he said that he likes to call them eye-openers instead of icebreakers. Because he says an icebreaker is just, its pure reason for existence is to break an ice. Whereas an eye-opener is to already plant an idea and to open the space in the mind for whatever will happen afterwards. I really like that. So an icebreaker just to break ice, but without deeper meaning, I wouldn't do that. But for instance, I love check-ins. So for me, maybe the equivalent of an icebreaker is a check-in, because I think it's important that everyone has spoken the earliest as possible in a workshop, because when you have said something, the likelihood that you will speak up again is higher because you feel more comfortable. So I love the stretching check-in where people would stand, or the participants would stand in a circle. And then one starts with a stretching exercise and everyone has to copy this one stretching. And while stretching, this person checks in and tells and shares whatever's on their mind. This goes around the circle and it looks super silly. Everyone feels a little bit awkward. So we do share a laugh, and everyone has the space to share whatever. So I think this is a nice mix between an icebreaker and a check-in.
Yeah, and also people are moving their bodies and actually physically warming up as well. The body's got a huge part to play in that stretching. I love it. I used to played a lot of sports, and stretching is always important before you sprint or...
Yeah, and also it refers to Amy Cuddy's concept of body posture actually impacts the way how you see yourself and how you're perceived. So through stretching, you're taking more space. So it's almost like dominant posing. So that you will gain more self-confidence, and also the group will look in a different way at you.
Yeah, occupy that room, and everyone's doing it together. So I love that idea. Thank you for sharing that one. It's the first time I've heard of that one. So this is the value, as you said, of talking to so many guests. So that's the participants warming up. How do you personally get ready for a workshop? What do you do the morning before a workshop starts?
Interesting. I'm not sure whether I do so many things differently. So I'm very strict with my morning routine. I'm a big meditator. So on a normal day, I would get up at 5 and meditate for an hour, and then...
An hour! I know this is not about meditation, this podcast. I'm just genuinely curious. Like, how long have you been doing this practice? That's incredible.
So I started with 10 minutes meditations about 2 or 3 years ago. And then it took me 2 years to get all my courage together to sign up for the first Vipassana retreat. And so it's a 10-day silent meditation thing where you meditate 11 hours per day. So it's a little bit extreme. And there basically you learn the skill. And since then I've been practicing that. Yeah. And I think it's the same when I look at your videos and your Instagrams and see you running, and you get up at 5 or 6 to run.
Yes.
I'm like, how can you do that? So I think it's the same. It's a skill, it's a muscle that we're training.
So you wake up, you meditate for an hour.
Yeah. And then healthy breakfast, I go through the agenda. I make sure that I have my packing list, that I have all the material that I need. They have my timer, very important, that I have the printed agenda. I don't like to use any technology in my workshops, so we're totally offline.
That's great.
Yeah, I think there's so much distraction with digital tools. And then I feel that if I have to look on a screen to have the agenda ready, then I'm not walking the talk. So I like to have a printed agenda also to take notes and to see if something changes. And then some dominant posing and trying to get myself into a positive mindset, because I think it's so important to be aware that our energy and our mood will spill over to the group. So it's so important that I'm in a good place, that I trust the process, that I trust myself, that I'm ready to give and to share my energy with the group, because that's all I can do for them. All the rest they have to do themselves.
I love that morning routine, and also interesting that you don't use tech. And I guess that would be so freeing not to have to run in and like load a USB and test the technology. All that can be quite stressful when you're sort of trying to be present and the sound isn't working. It can really throw you off, our personal experience. And I'm sure many of the listeners have had something similar. So actually not using tech at all, it sounds like it's very freeing. In terms of skills of great facilitators and trainers, what do you think are the attributes? What's important to really engage a group and to really drive an outcome?
I've been thinking of that a lot, and I actually asked the same question to my guests because I think it's so important to reflect on that. Also to remind ourselves what kind of facilitator do we actually want to be. And I think that for me, the most important skill is presence, including listening and curiosity. So it's important to listen. I had a wonderful interview with Oscar Vivaldi about deep listening.
You interviewed Oscar?
Yes.
When you interviewed him, because when I interviewed him, I'm like, I really need to listen to this guy. Did you feel extra pressure to really listen to Oscar when you interviewed him?
Totally. I mean, there's a pressure, so I was very nervous beforehand. But then he makes it so easy because he is present and he listens and he asks questions. So I think we spoke for 2 hours and I didn't see time passing. So that was very interesting. And this also reminded me of the importance of not only listening to words, but listening to the room, listening to body language. I think this is a very important skill a facilitator needs to have. I think together with that, it's about maturity. For me, the most important thing that I learned was to be bold and courageous. So if I trust myself and the process, then the group will trust me and the process, and they will play along. And I have asked participants to do the weirdest things, and never ever has anyone refused to play along. And I think as facilitators, very often we underestimate the power we have to just decide what's going on and to invite them to join the fun and to leave their comfort zone. So for instance, if I ask a group of bankers to check in by naming their superpower, if I had one superpower, I would blank. And at first they would look at me, what is going on here? What do you mean superpower? And if I go, oh yeah, maybe if you feel like you want to share it, but otherwise maybe you don't, then of course they won't. But if I look at them and say, okay, now I want to know what would be your superpower. And then they laugh and then they see that I'm serious.
Yeah.
And then they will start and they will share the laugh and they will see the humanness in each other, because even the highest ranked person in an organization dreams of having a superpower. And this makes them so relatable and so human. And this sets the tone of the workshop. So courage and presence are for me the most important skills a facilitator needs. Everything else can be read in a cookbook. Yeah.
That's true. And I love that you said, if I give them an option, the option they're going to take is, oh, no, we won't do it. But if you actually are courageous and put the question out as more of a statement, then and you're absolutely right about the power that we hold up in the front of the room. When I was in Hong Kong, I remember we're doing an activity and these grown men are dancing. This wasn't the first day, it was the second day. So the trust had been developed and people are boogieing around the room and laughing, and everyone is like the same status and having a great time. And I was just sort of thinking, it's crazy that set it up so well that they feel comfortable enough to do that in this work environment, which is usually very conservative.
Do you often use music in your workshops?
Yeah, well, I did a podcast on music the other day and how important it is. So what I came to the realization, I had one playlist on Spotify that I used. It was like an energetic, sort of uplifting type of playlist. And then I had a few people in the flip chart mention that they've got all different types of playlists. So reflection music. Someone's got like a welcoming to the workshop playlist and then a leaving playlist. So you can really break it down. Yeah. How about you?
Not at all. So since I'm low tech, I don't use music.
Yeah.
I like the idea of using music because I think, as you just described, it just sets a different atmosphere. I can also see that it might be distracting. And I think also that silence is a highly underestimated part of a workshop. I have one conversation scheduled on silence in workshops. So I'm quite curious to see what comes out of that.
Oh, cool. So you're interviewing someone about their use of silence.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd love to tune into that. Can you let our listeners know more about your podcast, the types of guests that you've had on your show as well? Because I'm sure I'd love to listen in.
Sure. The title is Workshops Work. And I am on this quest to find out what makes workshops work. So the story behind it is that when I only started calling myself a facilitator maybe 1.5 years ago, although when I look back to my vita, I think I've been facilitating my entire life. I would have never called myself like that. And when I started calling myself a workshop facilitator, I got these reactions like, ooh, are people still doing workshops? So I was so ashamed. I was like, oh, I'm a facilitator, trying to kind of eat my words. And I was like, I need to do something about that. So I started this marketing campaign for workshops, showing the world that if a workshop is well designed and professionally facilitated, it is magic. Through the podcast, and you might have had the same experience, I also realized that there's no room for competition because we're all doing the same thing. When we boil it down, we're all doing the same things. We're all using the same exercises. And there's very often this sense of competition amongst facilitators. On the other hand, I believe that we are all so different, and it's through our personality and our style that we really shape the process. And there are some who would strictly follow the process and have everything printed out and a huge poster. And then there are facilitators like Oscar who are like, oh, the room will tell you what they need. So usually I change the entire agenda latest after lunch. And I admire that, but it's the entire opposite. So depending what the group needs and who the client is, they will find the perfect fit of a facilitator. So I thought by having this marketing campaign for workshops and for facilitators, we can just increase the size of the cake. Everyone will realize that they need a workshop and they need a professional facilitator. And then there will be enough for all of us.
I love that philosophy. I find it interesting that you were getting that feedback about workshops. Were people saying that because they thought that online learning had taken over, or was it because they'd had bad experiences with workshops? Because I haven't heard that response in Australia yet. I don't know if the wave's going to come over, but yeah.
You sent us your positive waves. I think mostly it's because of bad experiences. And that a workshop, if we look at it objectively, it's a very, very expensive investment. So the facilitator is the cheapest part of all of that. But the time of the participants, the opportunity cost, so what could they do instead of sitting in this workshop? And also the impact of a bad workshop. And that was my experience before I started on my own. To have a workshop, to give a voice to everyone, to ask them to be involved, engaged, and to reveal their ideas, and then nothing happens with that. These are destructive forces that are very often underestimated, I think, because if you invite people to contribute and then you ignore them, they will never show up again, or at least not with the same kind of energy. So if you have experienced these kind of workshops that, oh, that was fun, but actually nothing happens afterwards, you stop believing in workshops. Or if you're sitting in a workshop and you just have the time that you have the impression you're wasting your time because you spend your day playing icebreakers, doing exercises that are unrelated with a facilitator who maybe changes the course throughout the day because something doesn't work out or he or she doesn't trust in their process. So I think all these kind of things might contribute to a bad reputation of workshops.
Yeah, and thank you for explaining that, because even though people don't say it, I do get a sense where sometimes I'm walking in as the facilitator and people are there sort of with their arms crossed and thinking, even though they're not articulating it with their words, you can tell by listening into the body language that they don't know what they're in for, they've had bad experiences. And I actually love that. A bit of a challenge. We're thinking, we're going to have a great time and we're going to get the best out of you. And I like that challenge.
Yeah. And maybe if you don't have this bad reputation of workshops in Australia, maybe you just have the better facilitators.
I'd love to think that. But I guess the reason I started the podcast is because I have sat in too many corporate workshops that just didn't hit the mark, or the effort wasn't there. Or that example that you used of that person just running it by the script and the engagement wasn't there. So no, we're not immune to poor facilitators over here. That's why there's even more need for people like us and people who listen to these shows that want to get better at delivering engaging workshops. So Myriam, you got your podcast. Where else can people find you if they'd like to know more about you and get in contact about design or to get you to facilitate?
I think the best way to reach out and to find everything about me is my website. And I have a redirect. So the easiest is to just type in workshops.work. Nice. The best URL ever.
Yeah, that is awesome. It is what it is.
So workshops.work.
Easy.
And then you get redirected to my iDays webpage and you'll find everything about me. Fantastic.
And so you're based in Amsterdam, but you're in Luxembourg today, about to run a workshop. Is that why you're there?
Yeah, I'm working with a client. It's a mix between project facilitation, lots of workshops. They ended up loving my check-ins. So for me, that's the biggest win.
Oh, congratulations. And thank you so much for jumping on this conversation before starting a full day of work. I really appreciate that and appreciate all of your insights that you've shared with our listeners. And hopefully if if you're inspired by what you've heard from Myriam today, you can listen to a few of her episodes over at Workshops Work. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been great connecting with you.
Thank you, Leanne. It was great talking to you. And I hope that I can feature you on my show very soon.
Yay, love that. Thanks so much again. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, you too.
Hey, thanks so much for sticking around. You've reached the end of another episode of the First Time Facilitator podcast. Connect with the show at firsttimefacilitator.com or follow me on Instagram at Leanne Hughes to find out what I'm up to during the week. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to share it with someone who will also appreciate the insight. And make it easier for yourself and subscribe to the show in your podcast player of choice. Thank you so much for listening and chat to you next week.